Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches, Jekyll and Hyde. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about setting and its symbolic significance. I need to give you a little warning. This is for people who have read the whole novella. It is full of spoilers about the end. So if you haven't read the story, do go back or watch this knowing that you're going to get things spoiled. If you'd actually like a little bit of help with reading the story, do check out my playlist where you have chapter by chapter readings with short commentaries. But for now, let's get started talking about setting and its symbolic significance. So the most sensible place to start when thinking about setting is, of course, the door. Chapter 1 is called The Story of the Door, so we know it carries massive significance. So let's just have a little look at the description. 2 doors from one corner on the left hand going east, the line was broken by the entry of a court. And just at that point, a certain sinister block of building thrust forward its gable on the street. So just immediately there, you can see that we've got these 2 verbs here, broken and thrust, both of which connoting force, potentially connoting violence. It was 2 stories high, showed no window, nothing but a door on the lower story, and a blind forehead of discoloured wall on the upper. So a little bit of personification here, which is very important, which you'll see why in a moment. But we're starting to get the first kind of indications of the disrepair that the door is in. It bore in every feature the marks of prolonged and sordid negligence. The door, which was equipped with neither bell nor knocker, was blistered and disdained. So we've got this little bit of parenthesis here, equipped with neither bell nor knocker, which of course tells us that this door is sort of surrounded with secrecy and mystery. The suggestion that there's no bell or knocker makes us think that whoever uses that door isn't going to want any visitors. I've also just emboldened some of these words, and these are the words that really fit into the semantic field of disrepair. We've got discoloured, blistered, disdained, and then this brilliant expression, prolonged and sordid negligence, that suggests that this deterioration has been going on for a long time. Okay, so you might think to yourself, well, what's the point? Okay, it's a vivid description of a door, but actually what you need to think about is the fact that it is Mr. Hyde that uses this door. This door becomes associated with a story that Enfield tells Utterson. And it's what piques Utterson's interest, and so you can certainly look at it as being symbolic of the character of Mr. Hyde, and this moment in the text, where obviously we've not met him yet, is going to foreshadow those aspects of his personality, his violence, and that kind of strangeness about his appearance, this sort of strange deformity. You can't look at the door without looking at Jekyll's home. Which we see a little bit later on. So Utterson goes to visit Jekyll in chapter 2 to see if he's at home, which he is of course not. And it's described by Stevenson as such: a large, low-roofed, comfortable hall paved with flags, warmed after the fashion of a country house by a bright open fire and furnished with costly cabinets of oak. Utterson himself was wont to speak of it as the pleasantest room in London. Lovely. So we've got a semantic field of warmth, so a massive juxtaposition to the previous description. We've got warm, bright, open, fire, and that semantic field of warmth is all about suggesting that Jekyll's house is sort of very open and very friendly. It also is a reminder of Jekyll's status, because we've got, for example, the costly cabinets of oak, so we know that Jekyll is a wealthy man, and we've got this little focus on just how wonderful the room and therefore the house is through the use of superlative adjective. Utterson thinks of it as the pleasantest. And so again, you might think to yourself, well, that's all very well, isn't it? So what we're saying is that Jekyll's house represents Jekyll. It's symbolic of Jekyll's goodness and character. Fine, great. But the more important point to make is that, yes, this is the front of Jekyll's house, but that door, which we discussed before, is actually at the back of Jekyll's house. So as much as it might, yes, represent Hyde and foreshadow his behaviour, we've got to remember that Hyde is a part of Jekyll. So it makes perfect sense as a kind of big symbol, because what we're basically saying, front of the house, warm, personable, lovely. Back of the house, the hidden bit, dark, secretive, in disrepair. As much as it symbolises Hyde, it actually symbolises Jekyll, or the darker parts of Jekyll's character. And that is also emphasised by this little comment that is made by Enfield and Utterson at the end of chapter 1, where they talk about how the buildings are so packed together about that court that it's hard to say where one ends and another begins. What a brilliant metaphor for that description of duality, the idea that man is not truly one but truly two. And the question is well, how much of man is the good and how much of man is the bad? It's that blurring of the lines. So very, very significant. Going into a little bit more detail about that door, if you go a few steps into the door, you're going to find yourself in Jekyll's lab. Now, this part I have taken from chapter 5, the incident of the letter. Now, this is after Carew has been killed. So Jekyll is sat inside the cabinet, and he is obviously in absolute horrors of guilt because of what Mr. Hyde has done, or what he has done whilst Mr. Hyde is inhabiting him. And I just want to draw your attention to a few really interesting descriptions. All of these bits that I've underlined would make really good quotations for your flashcards, thinking about the idea of symbolism. So the first thing that we have is a repetition of some of the language associated with the door. So dingy and windowless, so the idea of it being quite secretive, and dingy contributing to that whole idea of disrepair and decay. So it's a reminder of where we actually are, just inside the door. And then we've got this interesting juxtaposition between how the building used to be and how it is now. So it was once crowded with eager students, but it is now lying gaunt and silent. So you've got this really lovely personification. And I want to draw your attention to the adjective gaunt, which really suggests a kind of sense of sickness, someone being ill. Like gaunt means sort of thin and pale. And, you know, if you imagine a gaunt face, it would be really, really drawn. And then we've got this semantic field of disarray building up. And again, I've just made those bold for you so you can see we've got laden, we've got strewn, we've got littered, and then down here we've got dusty. So again, this idea of maybe like this chaos, and again, disrepair, so reminding us of the outside. As then Utterson goes in, he then goes into the doctor's cabinet, which basically means like little office within it. And there he is, okay, sat close to the fire looking deadly sick. So I'm hoping that you're starting to recognise that actually the description of the laboratory and of the room is actually symbolising Jekyll's state of mind. So he is in turmoil, he is in anguish, and there you can see the building is all littered and strewn with rubbish, so just like Jekyll's mind. The table is gaunt and silent, and there's Jekyll looking deadly sick. And all of this is because, of course, of the guilt he feels over Carew's death. And there's one other little thing that I think is very cleverly done here. So we'll talk more about weather in a couple of moments. But what we have is two references to fog. Okay, so we've got the light falling dimly through the foggy cupula. That's the sort of glass that you can see outside. But it even says, even in the houses, the fog began to lie thickly. This idea that the fog is invading the homes, and we know that fog and Hyde are synonymous, so it could be a reminder or a suggestion of Hyde's growing power and his ability to inhabit more of Jekyll, because if Jekyll's house represents him, the movement of the fog inside the house would suggest that Hyde is getting more powerful. This little bit focusing on the windows, so this is much later on. It's that teeny tiny chapter called The Incident at the Window, and I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things. This is really nice for looking again at duality but also transformation as a theme. So Utterson and Enfield are on one of their little jaunts, and look at the time. Look at where they are. It's premature twilight, so the time of day counts as setting as well. So premature, this little adjective here, means early, so unexpected. And twilight, this is the time where day turns to night. So think about that as transformation. Day turning to night, light turning to darkness, good turning to evil. And it's happening prematurely, so unexpected. I'm hoping your brains are whirring and you're thinking, oh, this could be about transformation. Look now at further points of setting. So we've got the 3 windows, okay, 1, 2, 3. The one in the middle is halfway open. So note we've got this idea about things being in transition. Not full way closed, not full way open. And in the middle is Jekyll. Okay, and he's oh, woe is me, as he is in this chapter. Now, they obviously have this little chin wag where they're trying to convince him to come outside. But suddenly something happens. We've got this little metaphor. The smile was struck out of his face and succeeded by an expression of such abject terror and despair, i.e. he's changing. And look what happens to the windows. Instantly thrust down. So, middle way through, halfway open, transformation occurs, windows thrust down. Okay, so actually what we have here is symbolic significance of the windows being halfway open. It's that kind of, where is he? Is he Hyde? Is he Jekyll? Symbolic significance of the window being thrust down. That's the transformation happening. And all the way back to our premature twilight, look, it's unexpected, because we know from later on in the novel that this is him changing without intention, without having taken any potion. Clever Stevenson. Okay, moving away from place, now thinking about weather, because of course weather fits into setting as well, and it's super, super important. So this is taken from the Carew murder case. It says, although a fog rolled over the city in the small hours, the early part of the night was cloudless, and the lane, which the maid's window overlooked, was brilliantly lit by the full moon. So you've got 2 things going on here, because you've got 2 types of weather. At the beginning of the evening, okay, the night is cloudless. It's clear, okay, so everything's happy, everything's okay. When Hyde appears on the scene and murders Carew, a fog rolls over the city. Fog and Hyde are synonymous, okay? And that makes perfect sense as a bit of pathetic fallacy, because obviously fog is difficult to see through. And we can think about fog and smog in London as well, and that kind of sort of dirt to it as well. We've got another thing going on here, which is about the full moon. So we're using some Gothic conventions here. Now, before you get all excited and start talking about werewolves, don't. That's not what Stevenson is doing. One of the reasons why werewolves and the full moon are linked is because of the whole idea of transition and lunar cycles. And if you think about the word lunar, think about a word that it sounds like, lunacy. So full moon is a Gothic convention because it relates to the idea of madness, okay? So this is foreshadowing the violence to come. So perfect example of how weather is used to prepare us for violence, to prepare us for character. And then another example, if you want a secondary example, this is a brilliant bit from the last night. So this is when Utterson and Poole are going over to Jekyll's house because Poole has had to ask him for help. Look at the pathetic fallacy here. It was a wild, cold, seasonable night of March. Just start there. Wild and cold, particularly that adjective wild. So there's a suggestion of things being totally out of control. Now we're going back to our pale moon. So again, we're using Gothic conventions here, but in this case, the pale moon is lying on her back as though the wind had tilted her. So you've got this personification of the moon, but the moon here is vulnerable. It's been knocked over by the wind, which is of course why it is wild. So again, this is perfect for thinking about how the weather prepares us for the violence to come, because of course this is the last night, this is the moment where Hyde is going to commit suicide. And then the last point I'm going to draw your attention to for a setting analysis is actually you could just look at the city in itself, the fact that London is where the text is set, because London is a city that is full of duality, because you've got such clear divide between rich and poor, and so it makes sense that you've got this divide. So you've got rich and poor, but you've also got about duality of morals, because we're in the Victorian era, where there was a real kind of sense of etiquette, how people should behave, and it was masking perhaps some of the underlying kind of naughtiness that was going on at the time. But look at this for some stunning writing. The fog still slept on the wing above the drowned city. So just there, we've got a pathetic fallacy, and again, little reminders of Hyde. We've got personification, the idea of it sleeping, and you've got this incredible metaphor, the city being drowned, so that it's drowned in fog. So again, you could, if you wanted to relate that to Hyde, you could think about his kind of growing powers. But it's this simile that I absolutely love, where the lamps glimmered like carbuncles. What are carbuncles, I hear you say? Guess what? They've got two meanings. Thank you, Stevenson. Another moment of duality. One of their meanings is rubies, jewels, red jewels like rubies. So, oh, look at that, connoting wealth, connoting luxury. Guess what carbuncles also are? Red boils, pustules. So the totally different meaning connotes disease, dirtiness, grime, i.e. the two sides of London, i.e. the two sides of Jekyll. How clever is that? And we've got more kind of beautiful devices here. We've got this lovely onomatopoeia through the muffle and smother. Oh, and it's a little bit assonant as well, muffle and smother, of the fallen clouds. So it's almost creating quite a claustrophobic city. The procession of the town's life was still rolling in through the great arteries with a sound as of a mighty wind. So amazing metaphor there, referring to kind of life. It's this idea of life rolling through the city despite the fact that it's drowned. Again, it's so full of contrast. It's so full of juxtaposition. That's it from me. That was quite a lot, sorry. But if you were to get a question on setting, oh, there's so much to talk about. But your big takeaways is setting and symbolism, and how setting relates to character behaviours, or that big theme of the duality of man. That's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. Give me a shout if you've got any questions. Just pop them in the comments and I will get back to you. Happy revising.